Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and today's video will focus on the World Champs. A few weeks ago, someone who shall remain anonymous was giving me a hard time over the lack of World Champs coverage, so this video will rectify that. I used to be obsessed with All-Star formats before really souring on them because of how restrictive they are. I still dabble in the format, which might be a future video, but I think it takes a particularly inspired idea to make them work, like the misfits made by a number of Discord members, including the incredibly creative and talented Sir Errant, who is definitely not an ageist. The idea behind the misfits is that the context of every original card is wrong, and therefore this new context is better. So to offer a fresh perspective on the World Champs and this format overall, I wanted to apply that test to each World Champs card. Is it better, worse, or even in this new context? I'll start with Mummy, which I believe is significantly better because there is no competition for uncovering. With mummies in increasing frequencies, you almost have to uncover whatever you can because you may not get to them otherwise. With just a single uncover target, you can be much more selective in your timing, and I think Mummy is just a better fit in this context. Next is Samurai Chan. I think Chan is worse in this context. It's already a deferred draw, but it was made better by Yokai Attack and the chance to get to that card draw early. Also for card draw, I'd rather have the upside of the quantity in case I draw them early. While Mummy has a similar problem, I'd rather have the upside of a continuous minion all game long than drawing a single card after it matters. Both have a chance to be dead late game, but Mummy has the much higher ceiling. Next is Calicoin. Despite what Hansel says, it's not all about the Calicoin, but the ability makes much more sense in the itty critter slinging context. I don't like this in the World Champs context because you cannot Calicoin itself, so this is your second minion, and it feels really limited in that capacity for a faction that wants to stage a few minions and activate power later, so I think this is worse. For Rainbow Girl, I also think that this is worse because while the Magical Girls aren't known for a lot of extra minion plays, they have some, and they have better convergence to make this meaningful. The World Champs don't have any outside of Mummy. It's still pretty solid, but it's hard to ignore that this is a worse fit overall, made harder by the lack of logical targets in the Magical Girl context. For the soldiers, we have Akai the Turtle first. I love a non-seeded death, but this is a bad fit because you are just giving a card away and never going to get it back. With Turtle in the Anansi context, you could cheat with collecting stories immediately, which I don't actually like, but you also had the Hornet threat where you could play the card later. You also got a Leopard bonus for giving it away. World Champions have none of that, and probably just give away Calicoin or the card stolen with Shield Maiden. I think Shield Maiden is worse because this has always had a tendency to whiff. Vikings had a limited means of setting this up, but the World Champions have none. With Shield Maiden, the idea is that through brute force of their quantity, you'd eventually hit something, but with only one copy, it's completely hit or miss. Vikings could also top deck the card for power if they don't need it. There is something to be said about this being card draw outside the Viking negative card draw context, but I just think it's worse overall. Diva is hard to choose. In the Disco context, Diva has a lot more versatility in the options, not just power, but movement, recursion, and last dance. Here, Diva is all about power, and most of the standard actions are terminal, which limits her significantly. I also think Disco's extra minion play goes a long way as you can create bigger bursts. Then again, Diva doesn't have to compete with other divas in trying to make this big play. There is also something streamlined about having only one copy that is there to seed and copy 3 power. Also, from a pure power standpoint, the World Champs have a 3 power action compared to Disco, which generally caps at 2, so that is a more efficient 2 power that is created in the new context. I'm going to call this one even if I trend toward being slightly worse. Aramis, I think, is better in the World Champs context because of less competition for the Musketeer actions. I also think Aramis plays out much more deterministically than Musketeers, who have to change cards together or hope that they can draw into what they need. Aramis benefits from some key non-terminal actions and the presence of A. You could play a completely unrelated action, play A to target Aramis, then play Bewitched, and you create a free action that isn't terminal, setting you up for a future turn. Stoneford was also hard. The Vigilante actions are a lot more individually powerful and interesting. Compare the Revenge, or Let's Finish This, to its Blissing Time or Sausage. But the World Champion factions are generally faster. Both have a purpose, and this card fits in any context, so I'm willing to call this an even trade. With Sheriff, it depends on what day you ask me. Today, I think it is worse because they lose all the deputies and all means of not short-circuiting the duel. I used to think Sheriff was better, but today I think it's clearly worse even without all the dueling competition. The only saving grace is that you get Kaiju Conflict, but that still feels risky to me. In conclusion, Dueling is terrible, and Judd Brown is wrong. For A, I think it's slightly better. Both have lots of terminal power, and A stretches it further, but the world champions have the ability to hit Aramis for extra actions. I do think A is underrated overall, and it just works in both contexts, but I like it here a little bit more. Fast as Lightning is definitely better in the world champion context. Kung Fu fighters want power counters, and that makes it really hard to prioritize the return effect. They also only have one action. This works much better when you copy the power, as this could be 4 power and an extra action with a chance to return Aramis. It's also a great follow-up to its blitzing time on Aramis to add 8 power and get him back. Fighting Spirit prize is even. It's card draw and moderate power increases. Both factions need it for different reasons. Sumos want the aggressive card draw for bulking stew threats, and they can push others off to keep the power down. This gives world champs some rare advanced power. This card is great in any context, and I like it evenly in both. High Speed Chase is easily worse, though it was still a good fit for this faction. You lose all base modifier synergies, including the chance to keep it in play, and while the movement matters much more to world champs since it is their only movement card, it is definitely better for truckers who can recur it, move it, draw power from it, and many other benefits. Its blitzing time is odd because this is a stock card in a ton of context. I do think it is better here purely because of the copying and extra action potential. It's weird because you could substitute any number of cards to do the same thing, but I still value it in this context over most. Bewitched, I think, is clearly worse. It has the ability to stay in play all game long, and while it can attach to rival minions, world champs have no means of removing it like the Russians do, and Russians have perpetually 2 in-play minions that will last all game long. It has its value in world champs for advanced power and is a great fit, but it is just a better fit in Russians. Smart setup is easy. Take away the payoff and the instant access, and it's a card draw you might draw. It also loses all the threat of the Luchador area controls. I still like it here, but it's clearly worse. Shark Tattoo, without the extra bases, it's hard to keep one minion on a base. There's no Tiki to receive this minion as a terminal 3 power play. Not that you would, but you lack Tattoo Artist to search and play it. You also don't have Ocean Tattoo to keep it mobile. However, there is no competition for Sun Tattoo, which is a big point in its favor, and I also think this is just a bad card, and I'd rather have a bad card fewer times than more times. Still, I do think Polynesians use this better, even if I don't like the card at all. Mousebird and Sausage is a card that I find to be better fit in Grims, but I rarely play it in Grims. Yet I frequently play it in the World Champion seemingly by necessity. This leads me to think that it is slightly better in the World Champs context. The power doubling from Diva is unlikely since you need 3 minions with limited extra plays, so this is more of an Aramis trigger. It's pretty much the same as its blitzing time in that we've seen a few cards like this, but I definitely rank the World Champs context over Power Poutine, even though Power Poutine is strictly the better card because it lacks the faction limitation. Finally, we have Kaiju Conflict, a card that plays well in any context. This is tough, because I think it's your best stone for a target, but the Kaiju make much better use of it with their actions. With Aramis and Diva, there is already enough of a way to generate extra power, whereas Kaiju Conflict feels like a necessity with Kaiju, especially when they can recur and play the same action in a turn. From a pure power standpoint, the idea of +6 from its blitzing time and +4 from Sausage seems to outpace the Kaiju output, but I still lean Kaiju here, especially because having 2 of them means even bigger plays. But I do see this as being really close. So for those counting, we have 5 cards that are better, 4 cards that are even, and 11 cards that are worse in the new context. I'm honestly not sure what these numbers should be, because not every All-Star style faction can be like the Misfits, where it's 20 cards that are better in their new context. How would you rank each of the cards as better or worse? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.